Okay, good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis. We're on page 1158. 1158. And we began learning the third type, Oifen, the third level of bittul of which he calls Efes Biltecha. And briefly, what we've learned so far is that this is even a deeper level of bittul, whereas in the second level, he called Ein Zuloscha, which means Oir exists, but its entire existence, its sense is from its source. And without the source, it wouldn't exist. But with the source, it does exist. This third level, he says, even with the source, even im ha'atzmus, the only thing that is sensed is atzmus. You don't even have the sense of an oir that is bottled to atzmus. That's essentially what he said. Shagam ima atzmus emetzius er klal. So in other words, it's not oir that senses and is connected to the moir, to the source, and it doesn't have any existence without it, but it does exist. But it senses it doesn't have any existence without the source. Here, there's no existence altogether. All it senses is the source. Now, obviously, we need more explanation, and we will get that, but that's essentially what we learned. And to explain it, he said, Yesh levayezeh, he brought the Shar Yichud V'Amunah, that B'tzias HaNivroim, the existence of creations, of every creature, the example in Tanya there, Le'elam Hashem Dvarcha Nitzah B'Shamayim, heaven. So heaven exists, but the truth is, its entire existence is utterly dependent on the Maimer Yehi Rakia, which Le'elam Hashem Dvarcha Nitzah B'Shamayim, Le'elam, it's always there. And should those letters and words be removed from heaven, heaven disappears automatically. So its true existence, even while it's there, is really the divine energy, the divine words, the divine code, so to speak, that is giving it life and existence. So it's only the divine energy that is its true existence. And should that be taken away without the ruchnius, without that koyach halaki, he says, Hoya ayin ve'efes mamish, it would be completely nothing. It didn't exist at all, exactly as it was before creation. So its entire existence is only due to divine energy. It doesn't have anything of its own. He says that he now applies to Oir. Says the same thing. I'm reading the middle of the page. We read it, but I'm reading it again now. The line begins Tamid me'efes v'ayin liyesh. So he says, and the same thing we could say, Baha'ir, inyan de efes bilode. The expression efes, nothing without bilode, without him, without God. There was no existence but without God. Without God. And the only thing that exists is only atzmus. That's similar, he's comparing to the explanation of Shar Yichud V'Amunah with a big qualification. Rak b'mitzias hayesh liyesh shenimtza b'bchinas mitzias. B'mitzias hayesh, like the heaven, like the sky, shamayim, being that it exists as a mitzias, because God wants it to be a heaven. It's not oir. It's not a sublime entity that's bottled. So heaven does not necessarily feel this Dvar Hashem within it. The oir, all it is constantly aware of its source. So when it's a mitzias, but who bottled mitzias mamish, but in truth, it's really bottled mitzias mamish, and the only thing is atzmos. Rak b'mitzias, yes, mashenimtze b'chinzir bottled mitzias mamish. Avla oir, harihu b'chinas ayin. Oir was not created as a yesh. Oir is a state of ayin in the first place. It's not like a shamayim. So both are completely dependent on their source, and there's nothing that exists but the source. But oir is davar. Va'bitlhu she'enu b'chinas mitzias klal, ki im kol mitzius eho atzmus. And it's bittul that it's not a mitzias at all, not just not a yesh, but not a mitzias at all, even of ayin. It's whole mitzias is atzmus. Now, of course, this needs explanation. We stopped here, but this needs explanation because let me just clarify. What I don't understand is the Shari Yechid V'Amuna sounds much more like Ein Zuloscha, like level 2. What was level 2? That Eir exists, but its entire existence is due to its source, and without the source, it would cease to be. Just like if there was no sun, there'd be no sunlight. So the whole sunlight is only a result of the sun. That sounds like the Shari Yechid V'Amuna, that all of existence exists as a shemayim, but its entire existence is dependent on the source. Take away the source, it ceases to be. But he's using it for level 3, bittul. He's using it for a bittul of oyer that not only that is dependent on the source, but even with the source, it's as if it doesn't exist. Because all that exists is the source. He's using the Shari Yechid V'Amuna on a deeper level. So you have to say that the pshat and Shari Yechid V'Amuna is not just that existence is dependent on the source. You take away the source, it ceases to be. But the truth is, the only real reality is the source. And the existence, whether it's a shamayim as a yesh, is not really mitzias, it's completely bought, like he says, in truth, not what we experience. And Oyer is not even an existent entity. All it is atzmus expressing itself. That's what it looks like he's saying. And that, of course, is a deeper way of understanding the whole picture. Now, we still need explanation, all of this. I said, let's be patient. We'll continue learning. Let's see what we can derive from what he explains here, and then in Tzadik Dalet. And then we'll, if something's not clear, we'll further develop it. But so far, this is what it says. I tell you right now, I myself, I'm still struggling what exactly it means. You know, I think I'm describing the pshat, what he's saying, but we still need explanation in it. But I would, as I strongly, but I'm going to do exactly what I'm saying we should all do. Let's learn and let's see what he says. And our role now is not to process, but to absorb. So let's absorb what is said, and then we have plenty of time to process and try to comprehend this whole idea. Okay? So now we continue on. So he says like this. Bittul she'en b'chinas mitzias klal. So b'chinas yesh hu batel mitzias mamash. V'zeu gamkein. The line begins v'zeu gamkein. It's a little lower than it's around a little less lower than a half page down. V'zeu gamkein, and this bittul of oyer, that it doesn't even have existence, even if atzmus is there. Without atzmus, for sure it doesn't exist. But even with atzmus, it doesn't sense an entity. There's no oyer. It's only atzmus expressing itself. So there's no independent sense of oyer. He says like this. V'zeu gamkein mitzat shemitzias ha'oyer hu rak l'idei dveikus ba'atzmus. And this too, just like the earlier levels of bittul, what were they due to? Remember, they were due to the fact that they're attached and aware of the source. In the first level of bittul, it was a form of nullification in the presence of something greater. In the second level of bittul, it was a sense of no independent existence because it's completely dependent on the source, all due to dveikus, attachment and awareness of its source. So he says this third level is also due to the fact that the existence of it is only due to being attached to its source, atzmus. And that's why the bittul in Eir, this level, this third level, Efes Biltecha, is that it's not at all a mitzias. It's not at all in existence at all. Rakol mitzias hu atzmus. Its entire mitzias is atzmus.
He's talking about the third level now, I think.
Not you think, I just said so. Not I think, absolutely about the third level. He's not going back to the earlier level. He's talking absolutely about the third level. That this level of bittul, that there's nothing but atzmus, is due to its dveikus, its attachment to the source, to atzmus. And that's why the bittul ba'er, shein b'chinas mitzias klal, kol mitzias kol atzmus. Efes biltecha. That the everything built up, nothing but you. So you have to say it's so basically level 3, I just want to add this, is not atzmus without eir, because then it's not a level of bittul, as I said yesterday. Atzmus doesn't have anything. All these levels are within eir. The question is, how much is eir a state of being or not? You could say it exists, but it's completely bottled in the first 2 levels. In the third level, you have to say it's not atzmus alone. Why? Because there's something going on here. But basically, eir here is nothing of its own. All it is an expression of atzmus, just like with the shamayim. All of it is the word Yehira Kia of the Eibishter. That's the true essence of heaven. However, as he explains in Shayach V'Amuna later, God concealed that from us, so we don't see it. In Oyer, that concealment doesn't exist. Oyer Kol Inyane is Raka Atzmus. Whereas in level 2, Oyer exists, however, it's completely aware that it doesn't exist but because of Atzmus. But there's something there. Here, the something is only an expression of Atzmus. And this is due to the dveikus in the source. That's what he adds here in this line. Ulefi zeh. Now comes a parentheses. Ulefi zeh, and according to this, k'moy b'mitzias hayesh, habitl de'eneid, ulefi k'moy b'mitzias hayesh, habitl de'eneid, nimtza bitl zeh gam ba'er. Yeah. Okay, read it like this. According to this, he's going again to compare it to bitl of the nivra. K'moy b'mitzias hayesh, just like there is a mitzias hayesh, you have a bitl de'eneid, the bitl of einoid mitzias hayesh. Similar to that, nimtza bitl kazeh gam ba'er, shezeh inyan efes. So now he's going again, which is interesting because if you remember, by the second level of bitl, he connected it to avodah, the bitl in Nevroim, the tzva ha'aretz and tzva shamayim, that recognize through contemplation that they are only as a result of their existence and perpetuation is only due to the divine energy, divine power. So he's saying now, according to this, the bitl that we call ein oid in the Mitzias Hayesh, we have a similar bitl like that. Dugmose, he says, not dimtza bitl kazeg, not dugmose, he says dimtza bitl kazeg gamba esh in efes. So what ein oid is to yesh, in oid you have a thing called efes. Okay, let me explain this for a moment.
He's talking about everything about the people of species.
Let me explain. I'm middle of explaining. Please wait a second. He says like this. You said V'yedaita hayem v'ashavesel levavecha Avayu alekim b'shamayim emal v'aretz metochas ein eid. There's an expression ein eid. There's another pasuk in Veschanon that says ein atar reis ladas ki Hashem alekim ein eid malvade. So derech, generally speaking, Chassidus explains in Samach Aleph, the Rebbe Rashab explains the difference between ein eid and ein eid malvade. What's the difference? Ein eid malvade means malvade. There's nothing else but him. Malvade, except him. But with him, there is something else. Like you said before about Eir, second level of Eir. That without the source, without Atzmus, there's no Ein Eid Malvade. But with him, Imoy, there is an Oid. What's the Oid? Oid. So that's what the Rebbe Rashab explains. Ein Oid means there's nothing else, period. Not just with him, without him, but even with him, there's nothing else. So you could say, God, if there's with God, there's also creation. I'll just explain it a bit with the Rebbe's famous Sikha Yutas Kislev Tafshin Lamed Hey. The Hadran on the Rambam. So the Rebbe explained the second halacha. What does it add to the first halacha? The first halacha says, you say this v'amud ha'chochmes leida sheyesha motzei rishon. Umemenu nimtzu kol ha'nimtzoyim. The foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all pillars, the pillar of all wisdom, is that there's a motzei rishon. There's a first cause. A motzei, an existence, a first cause that is the cause that causes everything else. Umemenu nimtzu, everything comes from that first motzei, from that first existence. Then the Rambam continues and says, V'im yala ala das. And should it arise in your das, in your perception, shehu ein motzei, that he does not exist, ein davar acher yachal hi motzes. No other thing can exist. As the Rebbe, what kind of statement is that? In halacha, you're considering if he doesn't exist, God doesn't exist. What do you mean God doesn't exist? We don't talk about that. Of course God exists. And what's the lashon yala al das? Yala al das in technically means an aliyah in das. Like it's a deeper level of das. How could you say God not existing is a deeper level? So the Rebbe explains that's talking about two different levels in the divine, the God's relationship with existence. The first halacha talks about a God that relates to existence, and he's the source that everything comes from. The second is, if you're going to say that God is beyond existence, it doesn't mean God doesn't exist. It means God is beyond any relationship with existence as we know it, then everything else can't exist. You need to have God relating to existence for existence to be. So in a sense, the first halacha is Ein Eid Milvadeh. Nothing exists without him because he's the Motzei Rishon and everything comes from him. But you don't say nothing exists in halacha aleph. You say it exists, but its existence comes from a source. It's not self-made. So that's step one. Step two is Ein Eid. That even with, if you're talking about God and the highest level of God, nothing exists even of God. If you're relating to the Ein Motzei in God, how he's a built-in Metzias Nimtze, meaning he's beyond existence in every possible way, nothing can exist. Nothing exists. If that level is revealed, there's no room for anything else. So it's complete Ein Eid, not only Ein Eid Milvadeh. So what he's saying here in this parenthesis now, he's saying, so just like in the Yesh, you have a level of Ein Eid, which means nothing but Atzmos. In other words, you can look at Shamayim and say, you know what, there's a heaven, I see a sky above me, I see other things, and then I contemplate and I come to realize, Yehi Rakia. Shamayim exists only due to the fact that God said, Yehi Rakia. There shall be a firmament, a heaven. Take away Yehi Rakia, there's no sky. But with Yehi Rakia, there is a sky. Then there's a level, that's Ein Eid Milvadeh. Then there's a level of Ein Eid that you come to understand, you know something? The whole sky is just a cover over Yehi Rakia. Even with Yehi Rakia, there's no sky. Obviously, that's not the kavanah. The Eibishter wants a metzias. But the level of bitli, you come to realize, if Einon Motzei, and he's the one that put the sky here, the sky, even with the Yehi Rakia, there's really no sky. All there is atzmos. On a higher level, he says, in Oyer, you also have these two levels. Level 2 of bitl of Oyer is that the Oyer does not exist without atzmos, correct? And take away atzmos, take away the sun, you don't have no sunlight. But with the sun, there is sunlight. And then there's a level you come to that Eir relates to, that even with the sun, even with Atzmos, like Ein Eid in the Yesh, is a level that's completely not, even with it, I don't exist. Because it's a level only thing that matters is Atzmos. Not the thing God, Atzmos wants, but Atzmos alone. That's what he's saying here. That just like you have the bitl of Ein Eid, again, Valfizek, Kamoy b'mitzias hayesh, a bitl de Ein Eid, nimtze bitl kazeh gam ba'er. Shezeh inyan efes. That's efes, not Ein Zuloscha, but efes biltecha, efes. So Ephes is deeper than Ayin. Ayin means it's completely bottled, but it exists with the source. And Ephes means even with the source, there's no separate, there's no independent entity, there's nothing. All that matters is Atzmos. Ubamokem acher, Rebbe Rashab continues, and elsewhere in another place, explains the inyan ein eid who dafke b'mitzias hayesh dafke. That the idea of ein eid, you only say it on mitzias hayesh. You don't say it on oir. So basically, what he's saying now, this level of ein eid that we said about the yesh, he says you can apply it also to oir. But elsewhere, it says that ein eid only applies to the yesh. Valofia mavur kan, that's elsewhere. Here, however, he's applying ein eid also to the oir. Ein eid, there's nothing but atzmus. Says Valofia mavur kan yesh lemer. According to what is explained here, that ein eid is being applied to oir. Yesh lemer pnei shamitis keich atzmus hu beisavas hayesh dafke. Because the true koyach ha'atzmus, remember we learned, where do you see the true koyach ha'atzmus? You don't see it in oir. You see it in yesh. Because oir reflects a source, so it doesn't tell us what real atzmus is like. It just tells us I have a source. But if you want to know what the nature of atzmus kavyochel, mitziyusim atzmuse, like we learned, and mechuyev ha'mitzias, and built the mitzias nimtza, they want to understand the concept of mitzvus matzmuse, of atzmus, that ein lo ilav v'siba acheres shekod melech chas v'sholom, that God is a self-contained reality. His mitzias comes from his very essence, not from something outside. How do you know that about atzmus? Only through the yesh, because the yesh is like that. So the yesh teaches us and reveals to us that element of atzmus. So he says, so that will explain why ein eid is dafke. He's going to say like this: well, if mavur kan yesh leim pnei shamitis keich atzmus hu b'savas hayesh dafke, commotion is barely ill, like it was explained earlier, a number of pages back. Al kein amitis habitl de ein eid hu b'bchinas hayesh dafke. That's why the bitl of ein eid is dafke in mitzias hayesh, because the true nature of atzmus is more in the yesh than anything else. Remember, the yesh is not bottle. But the yesh can relate to atzmus, the real true atzmus, more than oir relates to it. Whereas oir, it's not all of atzmus that the oir comes from it. So even though we said either you can, even a boira is not describing all of atzmus, but it describes much more of the nature of atzmus, the identity of atzmus, kavyachal, quote unquote identity, than does oir. Because oir could also, the light of the sun tells you there's a sun. The sun is not like atzmus. So light is not an indicator on the very personality or identity of atzmus. It's an indicator there's a source. Yesh doesn't indicate a source on its own without avodah and contemplation. But when you do contemplate, it teaches you about the personality. Like we learned that about the personality, about atzmus is. Now, why is this relevant here? I'm trying to understand. So what he's basically saying, that once you teach the yesh bittel, which it learns from oir, it's the sense of ein oid is deeper there than in oir. Because oir cannot tell you that there's nothing but atzmos, because it does not reflect atzmos itself. So then how does it stem with what we just learned, the third level, Ephes biltecha, there's nothing but atzmos? Because this is the word. Oir may not reflect atzmos, but there's nothing but atzmos in oir. Because where does oir come from? Oir doesn't have any identity of its own. So the fact that he's saying that oir, kol ha-metzias hu atzmos, he doesn't say kol ha-atzmos hu ha-metzias. He doesn't say all of atzmos is reflected in oir. He's saying there's no oir. All of oir is only one thing, expression of atzmos. If you want to know more about atzmos himself, you need the yesh. Ein arech lecha b'elam hazeh. You need the yesh that teaches you about that. That's what this parenthesis is adding. I know it confuses things a bit, because are we talking about the yesh? Are we talking about oir? So bottom line is there's a third level of bittul and oid that is similar to the ein oid in the yesh, because there's nothing but atzmus. Even with atzmus, there's nothing that exists.
This is not clear to me. By the yesh.
Okay, hold on. I didn't finish explaining.
Me too.
And 1 second, I didn't finish explaining. I want to say one more thing. And by the way, this is where the level 3 ends. We're going to go back to Tzaddik Dalet, who's going to explain this in, like I said, in 7-8 pages. This whole piece. So I would not be patient, as I said. Don't try to process. But I will say one thing that I think is important to point out. Before the parentheses, he explained that the Shariach V'Amunah, he applied that to Oyer. But he made a distinction. He said, but the Oyer, there's no Metzias at all. So what is that distinction? That distinction seems to contradict what we just said in the footnote. So let me explain. Why does it seem to contradict? Because before the parentheses, it seems like the Metzias Hayesh, even though its entire being is only due to the words of Yehirakia, the divine energy within it, but still it's a Metzias Yesh, and you have to say that the Metzias is Batul, Metzias Mamish. Why? Because it doesn't have any existence of its own. All it is God's utterance, Yehirakia, God's words, God's energy. In Ur, he says, Ur doesn't even begin to be, it wasn't a yesh in the first place, it's ayin. So therefore you have to say, not only is it's not a mitzias altogether. Its entire mitzias is only atzmus. In the parentheses, he said, the yesh, ein eid, teaches more about atzmus than Ur does. So the explanation, I already said it, but I'll spell it out even further. I explained a number of times that all this, the way God created the dynamics of Ur and Yesh, is really both are necessary components in building a Dira b'Tachtenim. You can't have Dira b'Tachtenim without Tachtenim. Tachtenim, by other words, is a Yesh. That's what Tachtenim means. Like the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 36 in Tanya. It's not Tachtenim, the lowest in space, it's not the lowest level. It's the level that's most concealed. And he uses the words, Tachtenim bihelem ere yizbarach, ad shenasa cheshach kafel mechupel, ad shemole v'klipis v'sitra achere, then it says, aniva afsi eid. So what's Tachtenim? Tachtenim is the epitome of Yeshus. That it does not feel at all its source. It's the agnostic world in which we live. That even though through contemplation and through Aveda, you can come to understand Ein Dover Eises Atzmei, nothing creates itself. And we learned at length the contemplation of Marabu Masech Hashem, Magadlu Masech Hashem, and how we can come to understand that all of existence is only here because of godliness. Or like a Shari Yechid V'Amunah, but that's not its natural state. Its natural state is Tachtenim. And that's what Nesav HaKadosh Baruch Hu Liyislei did it with Tachtenim. How did it become Tachtenim? Through concealment, not through revelation. God, it's Tzimtzum Arishan, Tzimtzum Achar Tzimtzum, concealment after concealment. Now we have a Yesh. And if you need to understand this Yesh, just look in the mirror or just think about yourself. We are a Yesh. We do not feel our source naturally. We're not drawn to our source naturally. We don't feel we don't exist without our source. We work on that. That's the role of the Yesh. And the whole process of concealment after concealment, Tzimtzumim and Alomis, produces this Yesh. The Koyach HaAtzmus is necessary because with all the concealments, from a Ruchni to a Gashmi, you need a Koyach HaBoira. The Koyach HaAtzmus makes the Yesh feel she'ein lo ila v'siba, that it has no cause. We don't feel like we're an extension of Yitzira, or from Bria, or from Atzilus, or from Elikus. Okay, so that's the Metzias. So it has two elements. One, concealment, and the other that it has a Koyach HaAtzmus in it, but it's concealed. What's the role of Oyer? Why do you need Oyer then? Dira b'tachtenim, because you need a dira b'tachtenim. To make a dira means begili, that it's a home where God is revealed. Not a dira can't be a concealed home. After Chetei Tzadas, like the Shir HaShirim Rabbah brings, cited in the beginning of Basel Legani, the Chetei Tzadas and the Chatoim, the sins that came afterwards, made the Shechina, which Ika Shechina b'tachtenim hesa begilui, concealed it, removed it, so to speak, from Eretz to the first heaven, to the second heaven, to the seventh heaven. And Avram Avinu, his Chila, he began to bring Oyer back into the world, reveal God. He would go around and talk to people, Kael Elam, that God and the world are one. God is the creator. He would speak about it. He would teach it. He lived by it. If you don't have Avram Avinu, you have Tachtenim, but you don't have Gilead. So what's the role of Oyer? Oyer's role is to reveal godliness. So Oyer is the exact opposite of Yesh. Yesh is that there should be Tachtenim. It should exist. And it should feel like it's a self-contained existence. And then through Avodah, you draw the Oyer into your life, into the world, and you Megala Lakus. So Oyer has what Yesh doesn't have, Gili. Because Oyer is the exact opposite. Yesh does not indicate or is not drawn to a source. Oyer does not exist, but only due to a source. Even the lowest level of Oyer, Bittel, of Hedet Tfisas Mokim, is because it's nullified in the presence of a higher state. We're not nullified. Yesh is not nullified by anything. The second level of Oyer senses that I don't exist without this source. Without the source, I wouldn't be here. Yesh does not feel that. The third level, which we're talking about now, is Oyer says, I don't even exist when Atzmus is here. All it is Elikus, Ein Eid. So that's Oyer. What does Oyer missing? So what do you need? Oyer is not Tachtenim. Oyer is not a Yesh. Oyer doesn't have Koyach HaAtzmus of Mitziusim Atzmusei. Oyer reveals the Gilui of Elikus. So what the Yesh has that Oyer doesn't have is Atzmi. The Atzmi that Mitziusim Atzmusei and built Mitzius Nimtza. Now we will learn that Oyer, because of its bittul, can carry that power. But on its own, so Oyer, on one hand, it does nothing else but reveal godliness. But it does not reveal the atzmus in godliness. It reveals the gilui of godliness. So now when you bring these two together, you take a yesh and tachtenim, and you introduce Oyer, Teira Oyer, and everything Oyer brings, ner mitzvah terer, everything Oyer, then you have the best of both worlds. You have Gilui, and you have Gilui Ha'atzmus, that's only Dafka in the Yesh. And that's the whole picture. So, but it has to go in steps. First, you create the Yesh, Tachtenim. Or I should say the other way around. First comes Oyer that reflects what God wants. Then that Oyer goes into concealment, and you have Kalim, and then ultimately the Yesh and Tachtenim emerge. Now you have to work your way back, and the Tachtenim begin to reveal Oyer into them, learn from Oyer, learn what Bittul is, and as you grow, you learn through these different steps and stages of Bittul, and ultimately the Yesh, which has the Koyach HaAtzmus in it concealed, will recognize the Koyach HaAtzmus, and it's Oyer that is the so-called the guide, or the bridge, an interface, the Ayin Beis. Yesh Amiti, Yesh Nivra, and Ayin Beis, the Oyer draws and teaches us and reveals for us Elikus. Now, in that revelation, so far we've learned three levels. One, to be nullified before the source. Number two, that your existence is completely dependent on the source and nothing else, and you don't exist without it. And number three, there's all of you, there's only Atzmus. Atzmus wants you to be. That's all there is. And there's not even I am revealing Atzmus, but there's only Atzmus itself. Now, in this piece where he speaks about Ein Eid, he's saying like this, that Oyer obviously is a much bigger revealer than Yesh. But on the other hand, Yesh has something that Oyer doesn't have, the element of Koyach HaAtzmi, Atzmus, that only that Yesh can bring into the picture. You bring both together, That's also, I believe, why he's connecting the two, because he wants to show how there is a parallel between yesh and oyer, except obviously there are different levels. Oyer is the chatchila never a mitzias la'atzmei. And yesh is a mitzias la'atzmei. And then the yesh comes to understand that its whole existence is dependent on God. And even deeper, it's nothing but God. In a way, when I'm thinking about what we learned in Tzadik Daled, Alts is Got, and Got is Alts, Hakolu Elakus and Elakusu Akoil, is a little similar as well. Everything is God means everything exists, but then you discover that it's really the godliness within it. And then comes a point that God is the point of departure. And God manifests in everything. Basically, everything is an extension of godliness, which is, God is the Iker, like Elikus b'pshitis and Elam is b'schachus, or Elam is b'pshitis and Elikus b'schachus. So both of them come to recognize a God. The question is, what is the Iker and what's the point of departure? Where do you begin? Do you begin with the world and you come to discover the Creator? Or do you begin with the Creator and you come to discover the world? Maybe it's almost like Das Tachten and Das Elyon. We're going to learn more about this, but this is where I believe he's going with the whole Einaid. So now we're coming to a level where there's nothing but Atzmus, nothing but Atzmus. That's how I would explain this parentheses on this section. Now, this is all in Ayin Beis. We're going to stop here. I'm going to go to Tzadik Daled because he explains now this third level much more elaborately. But I don't know if, we have time to begin that as well. But if somebody wants to ask or comment or anything, please.
I have a big problem with everything is clear, but the bitul hayesh, how could it feel that everything is God? It's bottled in mitzius, but what is the exact feeling?
Did you hear what I just explained?
I heard everything, and it's still not clear to me. The bitul darge hagimel, what is exactly the feeling of the yesh?
First of all, he didn't say the darge hagimel is in yesh. He doesn't say that anywhere.
He said before that bitul hayesh is bitul b'mitzius mamish.
That's the fact. That's not necessarily what we feel. That's the fact. That Shamayim is not Shamayim, it's Yehirakia. That's a fact. He didn't say...
We're talking about bitul.
Anyway, I think I explained it quite extensively now. And he's not speaking about Yesh here. He's speaking about three levels in Oyer. He's comparing it to comparing what Yesh is. The fact of the matter is, when Yesh combines with Oyer, the Yesh can come to through contemplation, and Aveda can come to these levels as well, where the Yesh ultimately realizes that it is completely only a reflection of what Atzmus is. That doesn't mean you and I came to that level. It means we could come to it. Oyer is there lechatchila. That's the state of Oyer. Oyer doesn't have a challenge. Yesh, there's a challenge. But the whole kavanah is that Yesh through Aveda should come to this level. In other words, Amitis Advarim is that the Yesh Nivra is truly rooted in the Yesh Amiti. You're asking, you and I don't feel it. Exactly, that's why it takes Aveda. But in Amitis Advarim, that's what the fact is. He's talking Amitis Advarim here. He's not talking about what you and I feel. That in Amitis Advarim, the Yesh is the true Einaid, because the Yesh tells us about Atzmus, and Oyer does not. That's what he's saying here. That doesn't mean we're on that level. It means that's the ultimate emes of Yesh is that it's Elikud. Just like we see a sky, the Tanya tells us that its whole existence is Dvar Hashem. We don't feel that. We don't see that. So it's what it is, not how we feel it. And Oyer is that experience. Oyer is experiencing bittul all the time. That's the key thing to remember here. We're not talking here about where we're at. We're talking about what the facts are. Even when you learn Shai Yichud V'Amunah, do you know anybody that suddenly feels that the heaven and earth doesn't exist, that you don't exist? I've not met anybody like that. We learn it because in our minds, we can understand it. We can understand that something's entire existence is due to the spiritual energy within it. But that doesn't mean we feel it. Oyer feels it. And through Oyer, we can learn to feel it as well through our Avodah. You have to always keep that in mind. He's not changing that picture here in any way. He's talking about the facts of it all. Yeah. Okay. Was that helpful? Okay, so we have here 5 more minutes. Let me see the Tzadik Dalet a minute. Let's see if it's worth starting. If you may recall, and I don't think we'll start Tzadik, I'll start that tomorrow. We're going to start tomorrow on page 159 in Tzadik Dalet. This Eifan Ashlishi, which he's going to explain at length. I want to just go back to help explain this a bit. You may recall I explained the difference between Kairach and the Meraglim. That the Meraglim wanted Ruchnius. They wanted to stay in a spiritual state. And why do they need to go to a land that consumes its inhabitants? Materialism. Eretz Eicheles Yishveh. A neshama doesn't want to come down to this world. Al korcha chatachai doesn't want to come into a world of tachtenim and yesh. It wants to stay in the world of oyer, right? Gan Eden, a place where there's gilui hashchina, ziv hashchina, nenim meziv hashchina, that 24/7 it's basking in giluyim of Elokus. We learn this all the time in Chassidus. Yeridas haneshama beguf is a challenge, because the neshama has to come down now to a world that's hostile to Elokus. You know, we're going to be learning Vayetze Yaakov Miber Sheva Vayelach Harona. So the Eir Chaim teaches that Be'er Sheva is the Be'er Sheva, the Sheva Midas of Elokus, Sheva Midas of Atzilus. Charona is the antithesis, Charein Af Shal Mokim, God's wrath. It's not just neutral, it's hostile to godliness. So to go from Vayetze, that's a Vayetze. So it's a big journey. The Meraglim did not want to go into, they wanted to bask in the glow and the revelations of the Giluyim they had in the Midbar. Man min hashamayim, lechem min hashamayim, be'er shel Miriam, anani hakoved. They were learning Torah all day. Why they want to become farmers and business people and have to deal with a corrupt world? Okay, the Eibishter said, but that's not the kavanah. Oyed is very nice. It's megala lakus, beautiful. But that's not the kavanah. In Tanya, he uses the expression, hoyel ulahem yerida me'er panav yizbarach. Oyed is actually a yerida. Because Oyed is only a reflection of Atzmos. It's not Atzmos. I'm sending you to a world where it's a challenge. It's a land that can corrupt, that can be corrupted and polluted. And I want you to transform the yesh. Who can create the yesh? Only Atzmos. Comes Kairach, and he hears what happened. So he says, okay, I learned my lesson. We're not supposed to be in Ruchnis. What do we need Ruchnis for? So he says to Aaron, to Moshe and Aaron, Kola Eda Gedeshim Hema. Madua Tisnasu. Why are you better than all of us? We're all a yesh in this world. And the Rebbe and Chassidus explains, and the Rebbe explains, that Kairach went the other extreme. Tachtenim? What do we need Elyenim for? What do we need Atzilus and Bria and Sira and Oyer? What do we need Oyer? We have Yesh. That's the Kavanah. But the problem is the other way around. Yes, it's the Kavanah, but how are you going to be Megala Lakus here? And what happens to Kairach? He wants to eliminate the whole hierarchy. It's like someone saying, if I can reach God through Kukuriku, what do I need to learn Torah for? Why do I need to daven? Why do I need to do mitzvahs? The Yesh HaGashmi connects to Yesh HaMiti, Yesh HaNivri, Yesh HaMiti. What do I need the Ayin Be'emtza? Why do I need Bittel? Why do I need Gilui? This was one of the big mistakes, Rahman al-Islam, of the Frankists and Shabtai Tzvi too, but What did they say? They learned some Kabbalah, and they said, Kabbalah, everything is holy. Orgies, all kinds of depravity and obscenities. Atzmus is everywhere. The deeper the yesh, the deeper the choimer, the more grub, the more atzmus. What's the problem with that? Because atzmus is everywhere, yes, but you want it to be begili. You want elokus, you want to refine. Someone will say, I could be a grubby jung, and I'm connected to atzmus. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Because the Eibishter wants the grubby jung to become a dira betachtenim. You need a mishkan here. So the only way is bittel and oir. Not because the kavana is bittel and oir. The kavana is tachtenim. But in tachtenim, there should be bittel and oir. So therefore, you need both. Each one plays its role. Oir introduces bittel and gilui. Yesh introduces the kavana el yena tachtenim. The truth is, the yesh is also bottled be'etzem. If we were able to see ilu haya nitten reshus la'ayin lires, if we were to see the Dvar Hashem, everything would cease to be, but God did not want us to see, because he wants a yesh, tachtenim. And he wants the yesh and tachtenim through its aveda, its initiative, through its effort to climb and reveal godliness. When you reveal godliness, l'mamayla lamata, you don't really transform tachtenim. It's somewhat imposed. So he wants it to be from Omata Lamaila. So there's elements about the Yesh, what we learn about, that the truth of the Yesh is also a Lakus. But that's just in the book. Like the Barditchever once said to the Eibishter, he said, Agresa Kunz, you showed a big trick. You gave us Elam Haza, a physical world with all its taivas and all its challenges. And in a book, you wrote to us about Elam Haba. We learn about it in a book. Why don't you give us Elam Haba and write in a book about Elam Haza, and you'll see how we'll behave. In other words, yes, the concept of Elokus and the concept of Bitla Yesh and Bitl Mitzias and Ein all this is all correct. It says it in Svarim. Ein Milvade. But it's in a book. We need to learn it. We need to work very hard to internalize it. Why don't you give us Oyer? Let us be Oyer and write in the book about the Yesh. Let the Yesh be the story that we read. But obviously that's not the Kavanah. The Kavanah is to be a Yesh. Read about it and then internalize it. So Oyer lives Bittel and Gilui. Yesh lives Yesh. But through Oyer and Bittel, the Yesh can be transformed to discover its true reality, that the Yesh also is only a product of Elikus and doesn't exist without Elikus. But that's through Aveda. And in the Oyer, it's not Aveda. In the Oyer, it's just the levels of awareness that we're describing here. And so far, we've described 3 levels. So next class, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Ayin Beis, to Tzadik Dalet, where he's going to go over this whole 3rd level. We're going to learn all this that we learned again with much more explanation, and I'm sure more clarity will emerge. So again, be patient, we'll get there. So we stop now on the bottom, well, not on the bottom, closer to the bottom of page Aleph Kuf 1158. You'll see Hadalad. We stop before the word Hadalad because Hadalad is the Eifin Hadalad. So there's one more level that we're going to learn about, but we're going to go to level 3 first in Tzadik Daled, then we'll come back to this. Okay.